welcome you. My name is Mark Chun, and I'm one of the IS faculty here at Pepperdine University. We are super excited to have 4 of our very close friends who are either VPs of ITs or CIOs or CTOs in their respective fields. We worked really hard in trying to pick influential people in the industry that have done really interesting things. And we got although we had 2 great speakers in the morning, we've got 2 additional great speakers in the afternoon. You already know about Harvey and Eric. Let me tell you a little bit more. I know Charlie shared a little bit more about the later 2 speakers, but we've got Joe Manfredo, and he is the Chief Technology Officer for Orange County. And he is going to be coming to speak after this session on public sector CIOs. So what we're going to be doing is I purposely worked with our IS department to try to set up some controversy among this panel session. His role is going to be the role of the public sector CIO versus the private sector CIO. Because there's a lot of core competencies that are similar, core competencies that are a lot different. And then next to him is Robert Fort, who is the Vice President of Information Technology. If you haven't recognized his name and already haven't read his bio, he is the former Chief Information Officer of the Virgin Megastore. And he's done a lot of really great work, and he knows chicken well because he used to also be the CIO for Kookaroo Chicken. So how was the chicken at lunch, by the way?
It wasn't Kookaroo.
It wasn't. So here's what we got planned for the next, say, 40 minutes. We wanted to learn from each other. We wanted to have an opportunity for the audience to engage our panel sessions about questions that they might have or intriguing thoughts that they might have. Before we get to the question and answer session, what I wanted to do is I wanted to pose 2 questions to each of the panelists. And each of the panelists, I'd like you to answer a part A and a part B of the question. And a part A of the question is going to be, what do you think are important characteristics or competencies of CIOs or technology executives in the industry today? And how do you see that changing a little bit in the future as these new technologies and these new competitive landscapes are being introduced into the industry? And the second question that I have for you is, what type of opportunities should businesses be prepared to face in the next couple of years? What opportunities or threats exist? So Harvey, if I can start with you.
Okay. We only have 40 minutes, huh? Okay, well, part A, I think I kind of addressed in my talk, but essentially we're seeing the need for CIOs to essentially become business people in addition to being technologists. So the competencies we're looking at are things like leadership, like business strategy and process, certainly innovation and business growth. We heard a lot about organization and talent management. I talked a little bit about risk management and compliance. I mean, these are really what we see as kind of the new frontier, what used to be considered the soft side of the role. No longer the soft skills, I think, have very rapidly become key parts of the role of the CIO. In terms of opportunities, I think was the part B.
What does the future look like?
What does the future look like? I think what we are seeing is unending change. What we're seeing is the velocity at which not just the technology industry, but business in general, the velocity is changing, fueled by technology, of course. Again, a lot of what you've heard us talk about this morning between myself and Eric. Also the magnitude of change, and I think Eric made the point very, very wonderfully. If you look at the major technologies that we're dealing with today, many of them simply didn't even exist 10 years ago. Even 5 years ago, some of them were still very emergent, and today we take for granted. So, just as CNN, in many ways became the news vehicle in place of network news, as an example, governments are now asking Twitter to not do their preventive maintenance and shut down overnight when there's an election on the other side of the world. As a perfect example, I'm not sure exactly when Twitter was started, but I suspect within the last 5 years as a perfect example. It has emerged as a major force, not just in news. I think when we look at the last presidential election in this country, was a major component of socialization and ultimately political prevalence. So I think this whole theme of continuous change, rapidly accelerating change, and the amplitude of that change is something we all need to, well, we can choose. I mean, we talked about this over lunch. We can either be overwhelmed and frightened by it and kind of put our heads in the sand, which I would prefer not to think about, or we can embrace it and figure out how to leverage it and how to really use it to drive business value and to build a better society.
If I can put you on the spot, you recently took a trip to Singapore.
Yeah.
And looked at a lot of the technology that existed in Singapore.
Sure.
And you came back very happy yet very depressed. Can you share before
Sure.
we move to the next speaker about that?
Sure. This is classic. This was in the context of business analytics, information management, business intelligence, and one of the things we do at the center is we're constantly keeping track of what's going on in different parts of the world, in different industries and such, to get a handle on where things are going. And before I answer the Singapore question, I'll share with you conversations very frequently with Fortune 50, Fortune 100 CIOs, and it's generally all about big data and data warehouses that are being consolidated and doing things like shortening the time it takes to close the books at the end of the month from 45 days to 5 days, looking at operational savings of consolidating the environment. When you go to Singapore, or actually many of the Asian countries at this point, and you ask that same question of CIOs, half of them look at you funny, like, data warehouse, what? We don't even have a data warehouse. What we're doing is figuring out how to data mine the information content of 10 million tweets a minute and get that information to our salespeople on their iPads in the store and figure out what to sell based on what's hot and what's not, on what's happened in the last 5 minutes. I know Robert probably has some similar stories about his experience at Virgin in the megastore environment as well. But what you see is a whole different paradigm. It's a shift in the way people are thinking about information and information management. Again, I think representative of this constantly compressing time frame where the state of the art used to be looking at history for the last 6, 12, 18, 24 months as a guidepost and a way of helping to forecast what we as business should be doing for the next 6, 12, or 18 months. What we're now seeing is more and more, as in this Twitter example, what's happened in the last 5 minutes and how are we using that to tell us what to do, actionable, in the next 5 minutes. And that time frame seems to be getting shorter and shorter.
Thank you. Eric?
Sure. So I've worked for about 5 CIOs so far, and the funny thing I'll put back, it's some of my CIO friends will say, yeah, you got to figure out if you're going to get shot from the front or shot from the back. It's and the point being is that it's a really hard job, I think, and for a variety of ways. And what in that particular conversation, what was I think meant was, look, you can do a great job with your customers as a technology leader, and even try to innovate depending how your organization is organized. Then it's like, oh well, IT is costing too much, and so let's get someone that won't cost so much. And you go the other way around, you get focused on cost savings, all your customers hate you because you're not doing anything for them. So I think one of the big challenges in those pressures are becoming even ever so more, and I'm sure that you probably see a lot of them.
Absolutely.
So I think that, and then you have maybe on the sides of those two things, you have, I think you have technology change, and then I think you have basically your organization, which you have to lead. They have to hopefully like you and do a good job, and that kind of feeds into those other two things. So I think trying to balance your time across all those different areas, which is a really difficult balance, I think. I know you're going to talk a little bit about kind of cost transparency, which is a good way to try to, I think, solve that problem. But I think that's one of the things that you're seeing all the CIOs kind of having to deal with, is they're dealing with a much more complex universe, a lot more complex business problems, and they have costs to manage at the same time as they're trying to do the innovation and trying to get that right balance, because you kind of really can't make everyone happy. IT costs money, and those innovations cost money, and you have to sell on the right ones. So that way, I think that would probably be the one thing I would just say on this round on the other side. I think the other question, which is what's changing within businesses, what we're looking for, and I would say a little bit of a look to the past. I think if you look at one of the statistics I love is anyone read the Outliers book? The Outliers, okay, right. So those of you that read it, that I think 20% of the wealthiest people of all time were born within 7 years of each other, which is really phenomenal, right? And what was that time? It was the Industrial Revolution. And what I think really has just happened in history, the Industrial Revolution was just automation of manual processes. And what we've been experiencing in the last 30 years is the automation of information business processes, or a lot of our businesses moved from mechanical to service-based and information-based. And that's just going to continue. We will continue to automate things as a race, and as we do, what's interesting is that it becomes a lot more connected, and that makes it more complicated, and it makes risks a lot more interesting. So I think from an IT world, as we continue, those trends will continue, inevitably. And if you look at every single technology, whether that's cloud, the web, all of those things, we're just basically taking it to one further level of automation. In mind, that's how I would look at it. It brings a complexity with it as well. It's a bigger machine. It's got more moving pieces.
Thank you. If you have not met my colleague sitting in that side of the room, Dr. John Mooney, he is an expert in doing research in cloud computing. He just got back from MIT as a visiting scholar. So he's got a lot of really interesting work coming up on cloud computing, and he'll be moderating one of the upcoming sessions coming up. But I wanted to ask you, Eric, related to that question. How do you think do you think this cloud computing trend is going to be a major factor in how we try to provide services? In 20 words or less.
Yes.
Well done. Perfect. Well done.
I have good coaching. See, coaching pays off. You want me to expand on it more?
Yeah.
You got 19 words.
Yeah, no. I think really we've been doing cloud computing for a long time. Whether it's we moved to data centers, mainframe was cloud computing when we first started. I think it's just looking for efficiencies in the way that you manage your infrastructure, and that will continue as the world continues to become more networked. It's easier to move processing closer together and do it more efficiently.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Joel?
Well, I do disagree that cloud computing has been around a long time, but we can have that debate on at another time. In terms of skills for the CIO, I think to me it's very clear. Harvey said it, business. And in business, what do you have to do? You have to run your business, and you have to lead and facilitate teaming, as so eloquently put in your presentation. So when I think about the business, I have a fortunate background to have been in finance and business and marketing roles for 18 years before I got to IT. So I have kind of a different perspective. What I see is the idea of running IT becoming running a business. And what does that mean? What that means is you have to evaluate yourself. So I think an emerging piece of the role of a CIO is a broker of services. You're a broker of services, and you deliver those services at the highest value point, period, notwithstanding whether it's internal or external. So I think that concept of a broker of service is very important. I think finance is, you can't run a business without knowing finance. I think contracts, I've heard the following in a meeting. Oh, we pay for it, but we don't own the code. What? Excuse me. So I think contractual savvy is a requisite tactical skill, as is marketing and sales. So those are that's how I see the role moving toward running a business, whether you formally charge it back or not. Now the future of IT, I think we're darn close to an inflection point. And either the CIO is going to dramatically accelerate, as backed up by the data that Harvey provided this morning, or it's going to disappear. It could be disintermediated if the leadership in the CIO roles fails to seize the opportunity Harvey talked about.
Excellent. One thing I wanted you to expand really quick, 2 words, if you can expand on is, you play a different role, the Chief Technology Officer for public setting, and you said that you need to deliver the highest value, the most value that you can. Value is different for you because you report partly to your constituents or the people out in the community. How does that play into what you do?
So let me start by providing a little bit of context of government. A government culture is 100% dedicated to the concept of do not fail. And that is stifling to innovation. So that delivery of value, there is a lot of defense in the offense, meaning the procurement practices are extremely constraining. And it's all about having the backup should you get called out. Now, let me I don't know if I can remember this parable exactly, but you'll get the idea. So there's a man and his wife and his burro and his son, and they are about to embark on a long journey. So the man starts by putting the boy on the burro and walking the burro. He's soon accosted by another traveler that says, "Why would you put the boy on the burro? Your wife should be on the burro." So he takes the young, healthy boy down, he puts his wife on the burro. And he starts traveling along. And he's accosted by another traveler, and the next traveler says, "Well, wait a minute, you are far older than your wife. You should be on the burro and she should be." So they switch. And he's traveling along further. And he runs into another traveler who says the same thing the first traveler said, "Put the boy on the burro." So the traveler goes to a bridge. He takes everybody, there's nobody on the burro, and he throws the burro over the bridge. What's the moral of the story? If you try to listen to everyone, you can kiss your...
I was reading the story. I thought the 4th person was going to be an animal rights activist. Why is anybody up? That was a good story.
The burro innovates and has a military.
That was awesome.
All right, from mules to the Guitar Center.
That doesn't work. I think the #1 skill for a CIO is to be able to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, the burden of this job is just
What
amazing.
CIO do you know that goes to bed?
Well, 2 hours.
Okay,
come
what
on,
are you talking
that's 2
about?
hours.
That's what your office is for.
I totally agree with everything that we've been talking about here about the CIO has to be much more business focused, has to really understand the business. In fact, I was doing an interview recently, and one of the things I highlighted is that I think the CIO's #1 skill needs to be these days to really mirror the CEO. To get in a position that they understand what the CEO is talking about, that they can quote the statistics of the business, they can understand the pain points of the business, and just like a CEO's got to do, they're looking forward and they're trying to anticipate what are the challenges coming to the business. You know, at the same time, as we talked about earlier, the table stakes, you're doing all the normal blocking and tackling and you're keeping the lights on. Remember, we're a utility to most of our organizations, so those lights have to be on. But at the same time, I think the #1 skill is to really get to that point of thinking like the business, thinking like the CEO, and so forth. As far as threats go, I think it's inbox sizes. Mine's full, right? There's just not enough space to deal with all the communication that's coming at us these days. But seriously, it's the pace of change. Totally agree with the pace of change, the magnitude of it, and so forth. And what I find funny too is, if you recall, IT's been a change agent almost its entire existence. It's gone in, and with technology, when people were afraid of it, we inflicted it on people. And now it's completely inverted. They're looking at us like we're the slowpokes, and they're inflicting it on us. So it's an interesting change to see there. And the other one is I was at an event a few years ago with Alan Greenspan speaking. And it's fun if you're really stunned economics to realize that it isn't just about numbers, but it's about people and life and so forth. And so they asked him about the gross national product. And they said, what do you think it would take for that to improve in speed? And he says, human intelligence. And what he meant is that humans only have so much ability to absorb so much change at a time. And that any growth is going to come about by faster absorption of that change. I had an opportunity to meet with Bill Gates once and asked him about it when it was in 2007-8 when they were throwing a ton of products out there. But I go, how are we in the IT world supposed to absorb all these things? And there's long tails on every project that we do. It isn't just putting the technology in and hitting that milestone date, but it's the aspect of going into the business and making sure that they assimilate it and get into new behaviors and actually produce the ROIs there. So there's just, with this pace of change going on, that is just a daunting task in front of all of us. And I think you're going to find that you're just going to have to start picking different priorities.
Robert, if I can ask you, you've been very successful in the media and entertainment industry. You've been very successful in the food and the retail industry, and now you are in the entertainment / if I can say, production industry.
Oh, it's retail.
Retail.
Okay.
Has there been consistent competencies across the different industries? Because they're quite different industries that you can point out that that you focused on in concentrating and developing across these industries.
I think the aspect of understanding the business is vital no matter where you go. And I think also that there's classic blocking and tackling. The ability, the key thing that a core competency you have to be is you have to be in IT empowering the business. And whether that's on a manufacturing floor, whether that's in a distribution center, whether that's on a retail sales floor, I think that it's very much the same. I thought of your question earlier, and I really don't see that much difference in some ways. And one of the things is you can take knowledge that you've learned in these other industries and you can bring them to bear where you're at. And that's where I see that. I don't think there's that much difference.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to open this floor up for questions.
This is a question for all members of the panels. In this fast-paced changing environment, how do you manage the quality of IT solutions? Because the time presses and you better issue something out that kind of solves, but you have at least a solution for the moment, and then you have to deal with improving it or changing it.
I'd love to jump on that because that's like my mantra right now. We've been pulling together Guitar Center, 2 of our major divisions, the Musicians Friend Division and Guitar Center Division, into a new enterprise IT. So actually my title's changed. I'm now the SVP of Application Services. So I have all the those brands to work with. And so I've been looking at the governance model. And I think the answer to that question doesn't start with IT. I think it starts back to something we talked about before. What is the problem? Where are the business requirements? Where are the expectations up front? We should have in our minds, collectively with the business and IT, what it is we're trying to achieve before we start marching down these paths. Because that's when you're going to come up with an elephant with its trunk in the wrong location, because nobody was thinking about what they really wanted there. I think the answer to that starts much sooner in the process.
Oh, I'll go next. I think I don't recall who said it, but someone said what gets measured gets improved. So I think that the role of the CIO or service delivery or application delivery or whatever needs to be smart about what to measure, because the other side of that coin always resonates with me is that we measure what's measurable, not what's important. So I think you need to balance those 2 things and don't try to pick, your most intimate 187 SLAs. That's not. You need to figure out which ones to focus on, and I think that's a competency, and that insight in the context of the business is what's important. What's an important role for CXO.
Yeah, the one thing I agree with both of those, and there's the strategic answer, which is biggest probably miss we have on quality is actually just delivering the wrong thing. But maybe on a tactical level, the thing I'll add is that one of the things I've seen is that we are moving really fast right now. And so you're trying to get good quality out there. At the same time, we're changing the business so fast. The other part of aspects of the quality was the quality of my service. And if the service is really slow, and back to your point, we're getting pushed, but we're getting behind, then maybe a different approach is needed there. And I've had some different application teams I've worked with that really have gone with their customers almost like a business agreement. They're so kind of agile methodology that they kind of really innovate in production. And so their agreement with their customers in those particular workflows is we're okay having some core application quality going in so we can see, because we're actually not sure, we're innovating the business process at the same time, and we would rather it move faster. So I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing financial calculations, you're not going to do that. But I think it just depends on the workflow process. So that's the thing I would add.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, there are a couple of ways to look at this. One is around the competency of being able to define the right problem so that you understand up front, and it takes time and effort. We've seen so many cases where somebody will write something on the back of a napkin or whatever it may be, that becomes the spec, and the implementation team jumps in. And not to say that there weren't appropriate requirements, frankly, that may also be true, but the real issue is there wasn't an appropriate articulation or definition of what the problem is we're trying to solve in business terms. Once that is understood, I think at a tactical level, there is almost always the situation where you make up the numbers, it almost doesn't matter. 10% of the work will get you 90% of the value. And then there's diminishing returns. So to get to 95% of the value, you end up with 20% of the work. And so it's starting with the right definition of the problem and then discovering where the real value lies, and do that well, and do it quickly. It's the other thing, one of the things that I think is going on in our industry, which I'm absolutely delighted about on the one hand, a little bit concerning, but this notion of multi-year projects. I think at this point, people have pretty much realized just doesn't work. I mean, these things just drag on for months and months and years, and people lose track of why it was they even started it. And frankly, when you put that in the context of the amount of change that's happening, if something's going to take you 2 years to do, there's probably 100% probability that by the time you deliver it, it's no longer relevant. Getting back to some of the points that were being
Probably not
made.
even in the same business anymore.
That's right, that's right. So, I got to tell you, I mean, one of the lessons that I was fortunate enough to learn very early on, and this literally came from the CEO that I was working for, was it's great to have a strategy and you got to have a vision, no doubt about it, but you don't implement the vision, right? The vision is really a context. It's sort of a way to create your roadmap or whatever word you want to use to kind of keep you in the channel. But what you look to implement are small tactical steps that are going to make a difference next week and the week after and the week after, all in the context of the larger vision, which is the value of the vision. But you need to demonstrate value and make people's lives better, whether it be the internal customer, the external customer, whoever your stakeholders are, the citizens in the case of public sector, which then builds the credibility, it builds the trust, it builds the satisfaction, that then gives you the license to go to the next step. And I think what you find is that, to get back to your original question, the overall quality is then geometrically increased, ironically, by these small little increments, because you're doing something that's relevant, that's making a difference sooner rather than later, that people can appreciate, and you just keep building on it in the context of the larger vision or strategy, which is the glue that holds the whole thing together.
Amen, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is for everybody or whoever wants to take it, but is there a way for an organization to establish a foundation that's stable enough to handle and be robust against the fast-paced technological changes that are going on? In other words, can you get to a place where you can now operate in a stable manner, unstable or new innovative processes and technologies, the integration and the evolution that's required not only to maintain the business, but evolve the business to a higher level?
I'll be happy to start.
Well, I think that's a very open-ended question, and I think it's very hard to define. One of the things that I would look for in such a Gordian knot type problem would be not only a definition of what is the question or what is the problem, but what is success. So where I would probably start in something like that is some serious focus on enterprise architecture, and enterprise architecture being enterprise architecture, not IT architecture. So I think that's probably out of the gate, that provided that your operation isn't falling apart and falling down, you have to do that first. Then next, I think you start looking at enterprise architecture and look at what business processes would likely benefit from that exercise, and then start with the high value ones first.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I would add to it, I can't remember if it was Robert or Joel earlier mentioned the notion of a governance process, which is also key. I think the enterprise architecture becomes the kind of the heart of that, but there needs to be an appropriate body at the most senior level of the company that really sets the priorities, that really understands what the demands are. Because look, I mean, we've said it a million different ways. We're all in a situation where, for all intents and purposes, there's an infinite demand against a very fixed, and in many cases, diminishing supply. And that's just a really hard place to be, no matter how you look at it. But if you have the right governance process that has the appropriate balance and the right decision-making, and frankly, the right sponsorship, which is another word I don't think I've heard yet today, is this business sponsorship behind whatever the initiatives are, I think you have a fighting chance. I don't know that there's any silver bullet or any guarantee, but it's having that dialogue and the right message coming from the top that these are the projects that we're working on, and have the entire company aligned behind those projects. Again, I think you have a chance of making sure that you're focused on the right things and that you have the right support. Otherwise, you end up with the typical mayhem that unfortunately we're all more used to than we'd like to be.
I'd like to respond a little bit, because I agree 100%. You do need IT governance, and it does need to be effective. I would also tell you that effective IT governance is extremely elusive. Extremely elusive.
Thanks a lot.
And
I think he just gave his presentation.
I'm an idealist, okay?
And one of the things that can really help you, I'll do by analogy. If I say to my wife, go ahead, go to Tiffany's, and without any parameters or without any limit, what do you think she buys?
The whole store.
So if you're not charging back, your demand will always be infinite. The best governor you can put on demand is cost.
Yeah, maybe just adding just a couple other things. Practically, I think one thing you could do is something like IDLE, if you're familiar with that, but having just good change management processes within your company is a very tactical thing. That can make a huge difference. I think a lot of companies have instability, just don't have good change management practices. And that'll improve stability. But one question, just getting a little on the more radical side, would be, how stable do you want it? If I ask that question back, because you could have it completely stable. I could lock down every single workstation in my company and make sure that they're only running exactly what I want. But with the consumerization of IT, we're somewhat having less control. We could lock down that control and make everything stable. We could open it up, have some more opportunity for the business to innovate, and that's going to have less stability. It will create less stability in your environment. So I think it's deciding, back to that problem, what do you want to achieve with that, I think is a big piece of that. And I wholeheartedly, it being sort of in strategy and architecture, I wholeheartedly agree with that. The story I will tell real quick that I love on this is everyone know who the most successful airline's been over the last 20 years? Southwest, right? They have one of their 5 overall arching business, from the original business plan principles, was we only fly Boeing 737s. Right? And guess what? When they have a plane that breaks down in any airport, In America, they have the parts for it. So that brings stability to the way that they're able to kind of manage that.
Standardization.
Yeah, but it's, oh, everything's a two-edged sword.
Yeah, on the governance side, you know, that's probably at the, again, at the more strategic level of this. You know, we're setting up specific domain steering committees that address the particular IT resource pool. We have gone through and identified who the business sponsor is, when that steering committee is the ultimate yay or nay on the priorities. We've identified who the IT sponsor is on that, and then those ultimately roll up into our executive leadership team, which are all the EVPs of the company. So each one of those domains has ultimately an accountability. We have a lot of cross-functional projects right now. We've implemented multi-channel in our environment, which is causing us, you know, one particular change affects 3-4 major areas or domains. So communication is important there. And when there's any conflict in those priorities, it ultimately goes up to the executive leadership or the enterprise IT steering committee, which is what I chair. And that's ultimately decided by our CEO, those final priorities there. The other aspect of this that we're doing at Guitar Center, and is certainly for debate, is we're actually outsourcing a fair chunk of our, we've already been doing the development side, but we're actually outsourcing a fair chunk of the infrastructure side as well. And the whole model there is around flex. We literally run ourselves into the ground with a certain group of people that were unable to flex up to deal with the increasing demand. And so we can flex, but it's a pay-as-you-go model. So we've established this year, 2012, and you know, next year when we have this conversation, I can tell you how it's worked out. We have a core level of IT resources that are to provide a core level of service level. And then everything after that, any of these newer projects that come along and they're placing demand, they're paying for them out of those projects. So that's the way we'll flex up for that. Ultimately, we'll come around next year and we'll evaluate what our core levels are again. And those core levels are being allocated back out to a brand, in each of the brands.
Can I, actually, I'm glad you brought that example up. The one thing I would also add, which I mentioned in my presentation, is expertise and being thoughtful. That doesn't mean that you can't outsource things. I'm not saying that, but it just recalled it's being smart when you outsource things. So expertise brings stability, period. Your best expertise when doing either changes to applications or making decisions in your infrastructure network will do it better. So the question just is, where is your expertise? That could be purchased, it could be internal, but you definitely need expertise.
Well, to your point about architecture too, we retain the architecture.
Exactly.
That's what we feel is the proprietary component.
Sure, and that's the competitive piece as well. Yeah.
Joseph.
This is sort of speaking to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, with the saying that the necessity is the mother of invention. Now that the economy has its constraints and your company is probably the same, are you really finding more innovation during these times, or are those constraints?
Can I give one quick answer to that? So I was a music composition major. So I don't know what the hell I'm doing up here in college. One of my favorite quotes came from the composer Igor Stravinsky, who, if you've seen Fantasia, it's the dinosaur, music behind the dinosaur scene. His quote is, real famous composer, "I feel most free when I'm most constrained." And the reason is that it forces you to be creative.
Look at any college student. Anybody moved out of their house and has gone off to college and is in their dorm for the first time. What limited income they have and how resourceful they are. I mean, I totally agree with the idea that constraint. Actually, I think it's a creative and competitive tool sometimes. Put that together.
It creates more of a problem for you. So in a case like Igor Stravinsky, he would literally make rules that he had to play within that were hard and actually basically compose out of those rules.
So that sounds like the entertainment guy's response.
Well, let me give you a financial services.
No. Throw that all out. We have no idea.
No, actually, it's going to be not much different. This is a real-world story from when I was global CIO. And one of the things Citi was very big on, as many of you probably know, is outsourcing. And part of my role was to manage the outsource agenda. And I spent a lot of time going to India and going to the Philippines and going to China and visiting all of our outsource centers. And after the first few trips, I noticed a pattern that was had to be kind of deaf, dumb, and blind to not see, which was no matter where I was, didn't matter what company, what country, I'd go visit the center, and in that corner of the room was collections for student loan, and in that corner of the room was collections for auto loan, and in that corner of the room was collection for mortgage, and in that corner of the room was collection for credit card. And I'd go, oh, wait a minute, guys, what are we doing here? This is collections, And the first thing I would get from my outsource providers was, well, yeah, you're right, but you need to talk to your business partners. We're just doing what they told us. Really, that was code for, we now have 4 customers and you're trying to give us 1 customer, right? But they were right. They were actually right. I needed to go talk to the business heads of all those businesses and somehow have the dialogue with them to figure out how to have collections. And it seemed pretty clear to me that we had a lot of opportunity to both save money and increase customer satisfaction, make the whole thing more efficient, and all the goodness that would accrue from that. So I went and started visiting with the business heads, and 100% of those conversations, this is in 2005, 2006 timeframe, 100% of those conversations was, Harvey, you don't get it. We're special. You can't collect a student loan the same way you collect an auto loan.
What were you thinking?
Exactly. You can't collect an auto loan the same way you collect a mortgage. And so after a while, I sort of got the idea of responding as follows. Well, you know what? You're right. You are special. Absolutely special. But you can't tell me there's anything special about a workflow engine. Hopefully there's no workflow engine providers in the room. You can't tell me there's much special about imaging. You can't tell me there's much special about a call director or a dialer. Absolutely, the conversation you want to have with the student is probably not the same conversation you want to have with somebody who's delinquent on their mortgage. And this was before the economic downturn. And, but those should be parameters and switches on a common platform as opposed to whole different infrastructures and whole different business processes and on and on and on. It was one of the biggest battles I ever lost. Absolutely got nowhere with it, and finally I went on and did other things. The economic downturn happened. I left Citi, but I stayed in touch with a lot of my friends, and guess what? Those same business heads that were telling me they were special were now meeting with the CEO, basically saying, we'd like to figure out how to create a center of excellence for collections. All of a sudden it was their idea, driven by tough times, right? I'm not sure if you would call that innovative or not. I mean, I guess from their perspective, it probably was really innovative because it was now their idea, not mine, which was fine. But I think it's sort of a consistent theme. It's, you started your question by saying necessity being the mother of invention.
There you go, necessity.
And there you go. I mean, I think that this kind of transcends the industry. And it's about change management. It's about an organization's readiness to change. In this case, driven by economic reasons. Could be competitive reasons. Could be lots of reasons. But the catalyst here happened to be bad economic times that forced these conversations to happen by the very people that 2 or 3 years earlier basically looked at me like I was the pariah coming to steal their breakfast. Right? So there you have it.
I had that experience.
Thanks for giving part of my presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. You really disappointed poor Robert.
No, I'm going to reinforce one of the key points he made.
So actually, one of the points on my last slide, it's called Conclusions and Lessons Learned, is financial distress clouds have their silver linings in IT environments. We'll get there. But I think when you're sitting at the head of a IT delivery function of any kind, and you are pressed with this, you have choices to make. You can look, if you can look for efficiency or effectiveness within your organization, or you can cut your service level. Those are kind of that's the constraints within which you must operate. So then you have to figure out how do you operate in those constraints. You have to determine whether there are opportunities for significant and sustained improvement in delivery and cost. That's the kinds of things that I think about it, and that is the context within which I think about those sorts of things.
Totally agree.
Robert, did you have something you wanted to add?
Want to finish your presentation?
No, I'm gonna.
I'll take the second to
I'm
last
hoping to
slide.
get all
I'm
the
gonna take
rest
a
of
break
it.
and try to redo it.